The Right Reverend Dr. Vincentia Kgabe, Bishop of the Diocese of Lesotho Anglican Church of Southern Africa, was born in South Africa in Soweto. Bishop Kgabe trained for the ministry at the College of the Transfiguration and earned a PhD in practical theology in 2011 from the University of Pretoria. She was ordained deacon in 2002 and priest in 2003. She served parishes in the Diocese of Johannesburg before being appointed rector in 2014 of the College of the Transfiguration, which is the seminary for the province. She was appointed Bishop of Lesotho in 2021. In the time that she was a priest, she also earned an MBA and is currently working on an LLM with Norman Doe in Wales. Just like your life and mine, right? Remarkable. Welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Winnie.
And it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague and dear friend, Doctor, I'm putting it on you, girl.
Yes.
I'm putting it on you.
No,
the Reverend Winnie Verghese, a proud diasporic daughter of Kerala, India, born to parents in Texas. She's also a proud Texan, and an incredible priest, theologian, writer, and activist. I know her from our days in New York. Winnie has served in a variety of churches and spaces, but what makes her stand out above all others, in my opinion, is her brave, intentional engagement with the power of the Spirit in transforming human lives. Her belief that Jesus is here as liberator of all. Please pick up her books. They are amazing, and they are truly teachings for our church. As the rector of St. Luke's Church in Atlanta, she is, I believe, the first woman of color to serve as their rector. Is that accurate? And she does incredible work in our church, both seen and hidden. I love you, Winnie. I'm so excited to be here with you, and this is going to be a lot of fun.
I'm just going to do a really formal introduction of Kgabe Peterson. Kgabe is a dean at the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. I know there's some Berkeley alum here, and we know each other from the Diocese of New York. She was among the many remarkable leaders there. And she's also the director of formation at Berkeley. She's a graduate of the University of Michigan, super smarty, and Yale for her MDiv. And Peters is currently, This is the thing you need to know about Kgabe. So she was at Briarcliff Manor, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in New York. And now she's at Berkeley Divinity School, and that might look like a logical move. In between, Kgabe just went over to England, as one does, and was the vicar of St. Chad's and with St. Mary's, and get this, and St. Alkmund's in Shrewsbury, as one does, for a couple of years, where she met the love of her life, Mr. Peterson, who happens to be a South African. So all the links have been made. And this is when Ms. Peters became Ms. Peterson. And she is a dear friend, and I'm glad to be with you all.
Yeah.
So let me just launch this. Vincentia, tell us about where you come from. One thing I know about where you come from is that you and Archbishop Thabo grew up in the same neighborhood and knew each other in those days. Tell us your story of origin, where you come from, all the things. Who are you in your family? Where'd your call come from? Help us understand who you are.
So my full name's Vincentia Kgabe. I am the first and only daughter to Juliet and Michael. They tried 4 times after me to have a girl, and God continuously blessed them with boys. And so I am the eldest and the only girl child, which now will come to the complications of the only girl child in the family, sensing a call to the ordained. So growing up in Soweto and sensing a call strongly when I was 16 years old, and the church in Southern Africa at that moment was still wrestling and discerning if women could be ordained to the priesthood, because we did have deacons, as hopefully one day there will be an ordination. And so schooling in Soweto, because apartheid was still in place, though strategically can be phased out, talking about the release of political prisoners and negotiations and change. So my family was hopeful that now with things changing in the country, I can dream dreams and be whoever that I can be rather than being limited to true professions that most black women will have had, being a teacher or a nurse. And there I rock up, I want to be a priest. Yeah. Very disappointing. Yeah.
You told your grandmother, is that right?
Yeah, I told my maternal grandmother, because we had that kind of relationship. So I got home and said, Ma, I want to be a priest. And like good grandmothers, made herself a cup of tea, sat down and said, what did you say? I said, I have a feeling, because I didn't have the vocabulary to talk, that I sense a calling to the ordained. So I went to feelings. As adolescents, feelings were very common thing for us at that time. And says, so tell me, in our family, where have you ever seen a priest? And she went through the lineage and said, there is no priest in our family. So now, there's nothing that we say it's in your genes. So at church, have you ever seen a woman being a priest? And I said, no. So where the hell do you get this thing of being a priest?
Did you say from God?
How will I implicate God in these things? Because it's just a feeling. I didn't think God had anything to do with my feelings at that moment. And on Sunday, she went to my parish priest and said, I just don't understand what's wrong with this child. She wants to be a priest. Help her. Kind of like deal with her, because you might know what to do with this. And my parish priest, at that moment, I felt that he was being dismissive when he says, forget about being a priest, just concentrate on your school. And I felt like maybe I made a mistake. I should shut up and not talk about this anymore.
So how from there, how do we get from there to Bishop of Lesotho? Just a little jump there.
A little bit more.
I've done with high school and knew that my first love was law. But I felt like maybe I should just start with doing computer studies, because things are changing in the country. Surely we will need to know something about computers and things. Didn't have money for studies, so I negotiated with the parish that I can be a part-time parish secretary. So can we have my 6 months salary in advance before I start the work? Because I need to register to study. So for 6 months, you don't need to pay me. I thought I was clever, but God was just kind of using that moment to get me to know the side which I now, which I enjoy, administration in the church.
I was going to say that kind of fits for being a bishop. Like, let me try to work out a scheme.
So that's how it got in, and then went through the process of discernment, fellowship of vocation as we discern. Vocation invited to the discernment conference, and one of the panelists was then the chaplain of the Anglican Student Federation and the rector of Sophiatown, who now happens to be my boss, and interviewed me, and was very nice and gentle, which helped through what could have been a traumatic experience of being a 20-year-old, facing 8 panels, being asked about all sorts of things that I didn't even know the church needed to know about my life.
We don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
Never, not out of my life.
Yeah.
Never questioned, never.
Yeah. So then at the age of before 21, few months before 21, I went to seminary. So I was one of the youngest students at College of Transfiguration. Yeah.
The rest is history, Ajide.
I know, and then she came back and was the rector of the very place where you had trained.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about, it's in the world you describe, in which your gogo, had never seen a woman be a priest and you hadn't either. What was it like to find people who mentored you, who supported you along the way and saw that in you and lifted that up?
Yeah. That time, mentoring for me was not kind of the concept that I knew and understood. It was who is doing this and is a woman.
Yes.
But somehow at the back of my mind, I kind of was clear what kind of a priest I believe God has called me. And that was thankful to the process of formation and theological education and being in seminary, I was starting to cultivate the kind of priest that I believe that God has called me. So there were women priests, but it was kind of very challenging to say, these are the role models, because I felt that they're not going where I think God is saying we are going. Then the thing was, can't you just be your own buddy, role model? Figure this out with yourself, and let's see. If it works out, wonderful. If it doesn't, that's okay.
Because there were so few women? So you're
Yes.
looking at Wilma and Vanessa Mackenzie and saying, yes, but that's not quite me?
Yes, because they were different. And I understand now that these are the priests who spend so much time fighting the system.
Yes.
And so when you have been in this process of fighting the system, there's a kind of presence you bring into the space. And the swear word was being feminist. So at the moment, you kind of like, I don't want to be a feminist. I don't want to be that. And so those were the challenging things. But growing up and being where I am so grateful. And there were not just ordained women who made it possible for me. There were lots of lay women and men who made it possible that I am where I am today.
It's a perfect time to remember that we can donate to a film about the Philadelphia 11 on your phone right now. Come on, everybody, we got to tell that story.
That made me really recognize that sense that you are not of the first generation of pioneers. And of course, even before those ordinations, there were many women advocating for almost a century throughout the communion for this possibility. But that in some ways, all three of us, the shoulders of those foremothers who bore the brunt of the hatred and the abuse, and that also marked their ministry in certain ways. I mean, even the privilege of being on the stage and being our age is by virtue of the things. But at the same time, there was a way you had to make your own way, in a sense, and to envision a possibility that you hadn't yet seen. And so how do you bring that into your own praxis as you go out in the world and you mentor those who are under your care and those who just see you and think, I feel like there's something here that I want to know?
Yeah. I think that is important because doors were open for me. And my commitment is not to close those doors. And if it's possible, can we unhinge them? Can we just take it out and make sure that the process and the path is important. When I was home for vacation, I will get a call from the rector of Sophia Town and said, "You're on, come and preach." That was an opportunity for me to be able to really see the doors being opened and opportunities to serve. Many years ago, there was a team conference held in South Africa, which was kind of communion, getting together, talking about mission and exciting things. And I was in class doing my master's, and I get a call, and I'm asked, "Where are you?" I'm at school. Archbishop Njongo Nkulu wants to see you now in Kempton Park because he wants you to be his chaplain for the team conference in that. A door was being opened when my professor, after being told by someone who in our diocese was supposed to kind of help with my education and studies, didn't take instructions from the bishop. When he said to me, "Why do you want to study further? Because surely from your family, you must be the most educated person now."
Wow.
And I just had a diploma, so how am I the most educated person? felt otherwise about that and got a professor who said, I will find funding for you. Yours is just to make sure that you pass all your studies cum laude. And I said, is that all that you want? To do cum laude? Okay, let's do it.
As you do.
And that has said to me, I have continued and continue to assist those who need to study further because that was done for me. So it's continuously paying forward. And if that is mentoring, I will take it. But for me is, if those people were not there at those right moments, I wouldn't be here. So why should I block a path for someone else because I have a say or a borrowed power?
Well, it's not even just that you're not blocking the path, you are making the path, you are making the way.
Yes.
And that is a powerful form of mentoring. It's all well and good to give someone a cheering speech, but to say, I'm going to provide, I'm going to make means for you to be exactly who God's called you to be. And imagine someone saying to you that you should be satisfied and not go further.
Yeah.
Oh, would that had not. Thank you, God, that did not come to pass.
Yeah.
That you're here today.
Yeah, so I studied just to prove him wrong. Okay, you don't want to? All right, I'll go and study.
It's an interesting, the dynamic you're describing, though, we can see it in our church as well, right? The generation that struggles for any access at all often isn't a very good mentoring generation. Like they're barely surviving and they're hurt. And it's often the next generation that's had a different experience because of that first generation, right? The ones before, that can begin to, if we think to do it, right, establish processes where we're supporting others, right? But it's a pattern we have in our church as well, right? And in all of our minority communities.
And particularly when I think about the effect of apartheid on Black people, and the effect of Jim Crow segregation on which apartheid was certainly modeled. The trauma of that and how it lives with people and how it blunts people's sense of the possibilities and what a powerful tool it is for control in all sorts of levels and ways, and how that gets mixed up in people's theology in such a way that being who you are and standing where you are just by your existence as, can we say it, the mother of a nation? Could we even say that? That's in its own way a healing place. And how do you experience that moment, being where you are in Lesotho? And tell us a little bit about Lesotho, because not everyone knows about the kingdom.
Yeah. The Archbishop is here, so I hope he has a purple stone, because we're going into confession. When we had a conversation about Lesotho, I felt that I have done something so wrong in the church to be taken to Lesotho.
Shame.
And I wanted to apologize to him for whatever way I've offended him. And because the diocese was troubled and had been troubled for a long time. And the province and the Synod of Bishops, they were in a position at that time because the church, the diocese could not elect 9 candidates. They couldn't elect a bishop out of that. 8 rounds of voting, they could not elect from that. And so our canon says, the last ballot is the ballot of the House of Bishops. So I'm in Lesotho because the House of Bishops took a risk and placed me there. So I think that my time is going to be very short in Lesotho because I'm putting all barriers before me. I'm saying I'm a woman, they won't like that. I think I talk more than I should. According to some people, they won't like this opinionated woman. I'm from Soweto. Lord, they are going to have serious issues about this Sowetan women and what they think women from Soweto do or don't do. I'm not married, so who's the authority they will need to talk to call me to order? know, and it is a kingdom.
Yeah.
There's a monarch. I'm done. So, and I will be, if God willing, the process happens, will be the third South African to be called in to Lesotho as the bishop. And the South African before me left before his time because life was not good. So this is really the church setting me up to fail. Archbishop Thabo said, I'll pray for you and I'll support you. And that's what he said when I went to College of Transfiguration and spent 7 years there. So his prayers do work, I think. So I will go there. So I continuously waited for the process to fail.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And now, consecration is December the 5th. Just mid-November, the new virus gets discovered, Omicron, and the borders are closed, and that's a sign. I am not supposed to go to Lesotho. Suddenly, people didn't care about Omicron, and the numbers that were said, everyone came from South Africa. We had people coming from Mozambique. We had all Basotho showing up because if you say it's our bishop, COVID will not stop us from coming to witness this moment. The royal house is there, prime ministers, everyone is there because I'm not just a bishop of a town or a city, I'm a bishop of the country. Then when all the Anglican rituals are done to make me a bishop, His Majesty the King, Letsie III, has to talk. And he names me, which is an honor in that community, and said, Omabatu, meaning you're the mother of the nation. For me, and that changes the dynamic. And when the king says, I know you, my subjects, if you mess with her, you mess with me. So I'm a free subject that can go wherever I want in Lesotho. Because I have the protection of the king. Wow. And it has been a remarkable journey of saving wounded people, hurt people. Some of the hurt and the baggage were caused by my home country. And so it's a journey for rediscovering and seeing what God can do in our lifetime using us.
The thread of call for you that is so clearly of God, because where else could it have come from? Right. Like vision in your life and for yourself that is of God is so clear in how you tell your story. It's profound. Right? So many of us know Vincentia because she was the preacher, the opening preacher at the Lambeth conference. And so we were joking about how, because people didn't know who the preacher was going to be, that they must have thought she got in line in the wrong way and was in the wrong spot, wondering why she was where she was in that procession and what was going to happen, that this new young one didn't know it was coming. Tell us about the experience of being invited and being the preacher.
Yeah. The story of my life, I'm at the wrong place at the wrong time. This email should not be in my inbox. I know nothing. I have no conversation with the Archbishop of Canterbury. This is a scam.
Your office administrator told you to delete it, right? Don't open it.
So I read it and it's like, nah, really it is a scam. How do you ask me to preach at Lambeth? Really laughed out loud. This won't happen ever again. So I'm not telling anyone because that would be saying, you are so crazy. Who do you think you are? You get an email from Archbishop of Canterbury. Then after a while, I go back and read this email. Then I check the signature, then I Google the names, like maybe this person will come up and looks legit. I look somewhere if this crest is the correct crest for Archbishop of Canterbury. So I'm doing background check on everything else before. Then I read this and I said, maybe let me respond so that they realize it's a mistake. Right. Then I was like, thank you very much for this email. I acknowledge receipt of it, and I will be very happy to be the preacher at the Lambeth conference. Said it is like, somebody's going to reply, it's like, so sorry, Bishop Kgabe, we didn't mean you. Sort of checking with the Archbishop because he's the head of the design committee, so he could have prepped me if this was true. So he said nothing, so no, there's no such. So I'm busy on my laptop. Then an email comes in, the same kind of from the same person, and like, oh, Archbishop Justin is so delighted that you have agreed. We will send further information. I'm thinking, they still don't know who they're talking to. And when official communication came later that day, I wept. Because then I went to the mode of, I am not worthy of this. There's a Michael Carey. Don't they know his address? Yeah. So I went to a place of, I am not worthy. And so I remember texting Archbishop Thabo, and he was like, oh, wonderful. It's like, he's not getting it. Called my spiritual director in tears and said, and the first few days of talking about this, she was gentle with me until she said, stop this thing of you saying the imposter syndrome. You have been asked to do it. Start praying about it. Start reading. Start doing things. You're going to preach at Canterbury whether you like it or not. It is it. And then it started to shift because I think if she was not that wise, I would have really messed up big time. Because I would have gone there saying, I'm not worthy to be here. I know other better people who could do this. Yeah.
It's so powerful when you say that because, I don't know, when I read your CV, I'm like, am I working on a law degree?
Right.
Winnie, am I doing that? Do I have an MBA?
Right.
Do I have a PhD? I feel like who is more qualified? As we were saying to one another, the people on this stage collectively represent the average person in the Anglican communion. They look like us. There are women who are Black and brown, and they are in their early or middle years, and we are the communion. And so, but nonetheless, it is your gifts that brought you to that place. And it's so funny how maybe you can't see that or you don't see that, but the world sees that. I mean, how do you become the mother of a nation, of a group of people to whom you weren't even born? God be praised.
I have no response to that.
There was not a question.
I receive.
Amen. So tell us, today is Moshosho Day in Lesotho.
Yes.
Tell us about Lesotho. So I've seen hats and blankets. I feel like I'm getting to learn about Lesotho from Vincentia's Facebook, which you all should follow.
Yes.
The most fashionable bishop in our communion,
Absolutely.
by far. We were joking that we're going to put us in our black suits in the replies every day.
It's going to be the
How
saddest,
dull.
most boring thing. It's not at all like what you do. You are amazing.
So tell us, Dad, tell us about this place.
Lesotho is a country all surrounded by South Africa. And that was in negotiations in the early, I think, 1800s, where there were the Anglo-Boer wars and the regional wars, that Moshosho had a negotiation to say, if you give me this part of the country, we can have peace. And I have my people protected. And that's how Basotho Nation was formed. And at this today it's Moshasho Day, where they celebrate the founding father of the nation. And one of the remarkable things is that next year the nation will mark 200 years as a nation. So there's a lot of excitement and building up, and for some of us to be, at that place, in this place, at this time, leading the church that the stories that he wrote to whoever was, I don't know, the Queen of England at that time, and said, I would like your church to have a presence in my country, in my kingdom. And that's how the Anglican Church got to be established in Lesotho.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is.
The church was invited to Lesotho.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's such a different story from so much of how the communion, or what we call the communion today, spread. And that sort of brings us to our conversation about relationships in the communion, because in a sense, the kind of love and support that you enjoy is no doubt because of that continuing relationship between the kingdom and our church that was built on relationship, not on imposition. I wonder about your thoughts and ideas about the communion and what it even means. I mean, you were the preacher. Tell us a little bit more about what you see and perceive about what's possible.
I think, every generation gets to handed, gifted, blessed with its own problems and struggles. And we have a responsibility in our own little way to mend what we can, because we will have to hand this to the next generation. And my role in this is, what can I do to be able to hand to the next generation a healthier Anglican communion? Because there's so much good in this relationship that we have. Because one, this church professes to be the church of God. That is common to all of us. This church believes in mission and relationships. How difficult can we do that? But we are so absorbed by things that divide us, that people will be out there believing that there's nothing good about the Episcopal Church or the Anglican Church or the Anglican Communion, and there's so much goodness. So I choose to see that, and I choose to work through that. Yes, we'll have struggles. Will they last? No.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. So, being the preacher of the decade,
Hey, I hadn't thought about that. Preacher of the decade. That's what I'm gonna start calling you. Preacher of the decade.
Yeah, because the next Lambeth preacher will be in 10 years' time or so.
Oh, wow. And who's so true?
So can I just kind of use this time, this borrowed power, and this responsibility of being the Bishop of Lesotho to say, Lesotho is known as a peaceful nation. Can we import that to everyone and everywhere else? Yeah.
I want to say something about the power of relationship. Part of what we get to see in Facebook, for all the traumas of Facebook, is as I'm watching you in your daily travels around Lesotho, we just got to see shepherds in a very high place, living close to the land, isolated by themselves, with their bishop among them.
Yeah.
Right, the power of showing up. So this little sample of the communion. One of my stories when I was in New York at St. Mark's in the Bowery is after Sandy, which just devastated our part of New York, our little neighborhood, in this weird kind of devastation where much of the diocese was fine, and some of us were not at all. And we had had weeks of kind of recovery from that, and it had been a very awkward week, because people would call the office and want to send their interns because they assumed we were getting funding because we were doing aid. And it was just me and Jay making the bulletins and giving away our candles and giving away our food. And people that are in the room, like Matt Hyde and others, came with everything they had, brought all the food, all the resources they had, and we gave it away. It's just the most, I apologize for my language, but half-assed way to approach it. We're just doing the best we could, right, with people. And a couple of weeks in, Yesterday Peters walks up the stairs in our beleaguered, exhausted church, where we're literally giving everything away that we can, with the little what she had gathered from Briarcliff. Her folks, Briarcliff Manor, were concerned. And she put stuff in her car and driven down, dropped it off, and I literally put it in a shopping cart, and took it down to the projects and put it in a room where people were going to get what they needed. But what I remember, she walked up the stairs, gave me a big hug. I barely knew you at all.
That's true.
And it felt like you could have been from Lesotho. Briarcliff Manor felt so far away at that point. And I was so alone. I didn't know how alone I felt. And how terrified I was for all the people around us that were hungry. And she showed up, and there's something in the Bible about showing up with the things you have, right? She just showed up with the things she had. And when I was at Trinity, I got a letter from Wilma Jacobson, among the first 2 women ordained in South Africa, because we had known each other in seminary. Desmond Tutu had sent her to Union for a year. I had met her, I was in awe. She had been Desmond Tutu's chaplain, right? Brilliant priest. And said, now that you're at Trinity, we're trying to put a conference together for the 20th or 25th anniversary of the ordination of women in Southern Africa. We just want to gather everybody and see where the church is. Can you help? And I remember walking over to the office that could help, a little terrified that I didn't really know what Wilma had been up to. Would they think I was out of my mind? It's a conference. Who needs a conference? And we got it, and we sent it. And I watched as all of those women gathered, extraordinarily diverse in language and culture, churchmanship, and sang and prayed. And 3 of the Black African women who are bishops in Africa right now were at that conference, right? So we gave what useless little thing we had. We could not make that happen if we had wanted to make it happen. And the people were gathered, and God did the work.
Yes.
And isn't that the work of communion and network?
That's really powerful. I think that, for all that I can say, and like as you said about how social media divides us and is so difficult and dramatic and frustrating, I think one thing that I've noticed is how intimate it makes our lives together if we allow it. And particularly during the pandemic, when I, like many people, was not able to go home, I watched your feed every day. And when I tell you great fashion choices, I mean great fashion choices, people. Go through the feed. It is Instagram worthy. But back to more important things, the kind of programming you were doing wasn't just about your students or what was happening at Kgabe, but it was about trying to encourage and support leadership who were in relatively remote places, both graduates of the school and others who you knew felt very disconnected from what was happening, felt very alone and isolated. And I want to say that one of the possibilities I see is not the African continent or the subcontinent of the Indian subcontinent being treated as though they are our humble bearers of our gifts, but rather as the most vibrant and alive part of our entire communion. And I just wonder how we might be able to, as those who live in this rather sleepy part of the communion, what we might be able to learn from the kind of things that are happening in South Africa and happening in all sorts of places and ways, and that don't require a ton of money.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the things that you do and that you see both in our part of the church, but also more widely in South Africa and Lesotho and the surrounding areas, because it's interesting.
Yeah. One of the things that I believe in, that we get into these positions of leadership to be good stewards of what God has given us. And so what I have and how I can use it to better other people's lives and through that spread the gospel, it will happen. College of the Transfiguration was prepared in a different way for COVID, because in 2019, we were hit by a water shortage in Grahamstown. And I had to make the difficult decision of closing down the college, because if there's no water in that space, what one has to do. So during that time when I had sent everyone else away and had to figure out what we need to do, we had to find ways with partners and friends that we need to buy water tanks and do filters and do boreholes so that they have to come back to school and the program has to continue to happen. So it's one of those kind of things that crisis makes you, I think, humble and teach you lessons that if you were not in there, couldn't happen. So we had learned to do things remotely and in isolation. So when it hit again, COVID, we had to deal with issues of saying, for some of the students, college or seminary was a place where they will have, for the first time, their own rooms. They will have 3 meals a day. They will have access to computers and internet. So when you send them home and still expect the academic program and formation to happen, what are they going to do? Again, lobby, organize, make sure that they have access to those things back home. But I had to think, because one student had said to me, Rector, I need sanitary pads. Then I had to think, how many of them? So how do we do this? So you don't have a discretionary fund. You use your stipend to do this. Go and say, God will provide. So one of the things is that what we have is for us, to use it for the good of others. I believe that when you hoard what God has blessed you, it rots and then useless to use after time.
Oh, so just to be super clear, right? You're talking about a need in daily sustenance, right? A lack of resource.
Yeah.
But also, you're talking about a sophisticated urban environment in which people have internet access, there's sports, there's like a whole vibrant life, including in Lesotho, right? And the Spirit-filled church is growing, right? And it's the expectation. Yeah. I've yet to go to an empty church when I'm visiting, maybe because they don't take you to them, but I suspect it's actually true that the ways that we struggle with church, often many of us very well resourced, no lack of anything, and something we're doing is not compelling enough, is that people aren't falling out the doors, which is my experience in certain parts of the world, where they have access to every entertainment, every busy thing, difficult to get into colleges as well, trying to get your kids the best things in life. All those same things are happening, and profound need right next to it, so even more struggle in some ways. I've not seen the resources for the church anywhere in the world that we have in this country. Tell us about, what's your analysis? What do you think's going on?
I think God loves others more than others.
Oh, please say more.
That's a conversation that I'm having with God, in our afternoon chat, this gets to be brought up. And I think for me that the struggle and the issues of poverty, when you have tried all and said all, you go back to your maker and ask for a way and a direction. And a church has been a sanctuary for us. I think there's a hymn somehow that, goes into that. So, and I think in our African context, you will hear that when you are happy, you sing. When you're sad, you sing. When you cry, you sing. So what a better way to do this in a place called church. But a church, again, like in many other contexts, that's where you get the latest gossip. Why would you want to miss that? But again, we talk of community where everyone knows everyone and knows everyone else's business in the village. So from seminary, what I was teaching my students was that the church, the building, yes, it's important, but can we do church outside of the buildings? Those buildings doesn't really define who we are. And I think most of the time we hold on to the building, which most of us might use once or twice a day, when people in their communities do church and meet God every day. Can we join and do that in those spaces? So it's just trying to really redefine, and you will see in Lesotho that I will go and visit one of our schools during the week. Because I can't wait for Sunday to do that. Other things should happen, visitations, need to ride a horse to get up the mountain. That's just too much work.
Well, I have to tell.
I'm going to jump in there.
Jump in there.
Three things we got to come back to.
Yes.
Just so, Desmond Tutu was the Bishop of Lesotho. That was the first place he was bishop. There are beautiful pictures of him in his leather jacket with a prayer book in hand, I'm guessing it's a prayer book, on the back of a horse going up to the high places in Lesotho. So Bishop Vincentia is an heir of Bishop Desmond. And I believe you had a very special gift from his family when you went to Lesotho. Will you tell us about that?
Yes. So he got to know while he was sick, but not, terminal about the appointment in Lesotho, and was absolutely excited because he had worked in Lesotho and lived in Lesotho, and told me that the family will represent him because he was not well, and wished me well in this. So he had done that with College of Transfiguration when I went there as the dean of the seminary. So his excitement was he started maybe rewriting his will around that time, because he said to his family a set of vestments that he loved, and his vestment bag that had been everywhere with him, that it needs to be brought to Lesotho for me. So I wear that with pride. I have restored the bag, and it's going everywhere with me because so that was an honor that I got to get his vestments. But I'm not riding a horse.
But that actually brings us to the topic of your law degree that you're working on, your dissertation for that degree. And you take on the mantle. What a loving and joyful man he was. And what a joyful person you are. I love being in your presence. But the mantle of justice, because the reality is that South Africa, the country of your birth, the country of your heart, is not a poor country by any means. It's not a country without resources. It's not a country without any of these things. And somehow, in some way, the people who are indigenous to that space have found themselves separated from the possibility of life-giving livelihood. And your work is about land and about the challenges and troubles of land and its ownership. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that might be a part of your own theology and your own sense of mission in the place that you call home?
Yeah. I think in many communities, land defines who you are. Connected to the land gives you an identity. And with the forced removals that Archbishop Thabo spoke about yesterday, and dispossessing people of land, and the Land Act that had said, if you're certain color and race, you'll be here, and all those kind of things, has created a tension. And so in the last decade or so, South Africa has been talking about redistribution of land. There are those who want it to be done in a militant way, adopting a Zimbabwean lifestyle, model of doing it. There are those talking about willing buyer, willing seller. And the church is implicated in this process because some of the land that the church owns, we need to figure out how it got it. And so it gets to where I am now, where I find myself in the office of bishop, where the canons talk about the bishop providing faculty if a diocese or a parish needs to build or construct something, the bishop has to give approval. So one was just saying, when they were writing the canons, did they ask if the bishop has a qualification to decide on issues of land, quantity, surveyors, architects, and all those kind of things, that the bishop gets to do this? So the plans, reading the plans and the budgeting and all those kind of things. So I'm in the office now that I am expected to do these things. So a question came, on whose land are they building this?
Hey.
Whose land belongs, because the church is silent about that. And I get to give people a go-ahead to do this. So I'm looking at civil law in terms of what it says about the land and what the discourse is in South Africa. In Lesotho, the issue of land, they say the land belongs to the people held in trust by the king. So they don't talk about private land.
Wow.
It's public land. But part of the land that the church has was the church that the English, when they were there and left in 1966, said it was their land. And now they're giving it to the church. So I'm asking the church, do they know what they're doing? Can we look at these canons? But can we be honest about who it belongs to.
So you're saying it's a nation that has an understanding of land as the commons.
Yes.
And the church is one of the groups that has come in with an understanding of the land as private property. We don't know anything about that yet today.
Oh,
Nothing.
never.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's not an issue.
we were indigenous to this moment. I mean, don't you know? I mean, this is exactly where I was born. My ancestors, of course, absolutely.
That's groundbreaking scholarship.
And it's challenging. It's challenging because if you think about the nature of the communion, this is an issue not just in South Africa, but really everywhere that the communion is, because the sort of, I don't want to say, the sort of conjoined twin of this spread of the gospel is this acquisition of land, supposedly for religious purpose, but often for wealth gain and other things. And I wonder what kind of implications your work will have for challenges they'll bring, but also the joy of liberating us from the idea that things that are stolen could ever be about freedom or about the gospel. That we don't have to make some kind of, not just repair, but really acknowledge and transform how we look at land.
Yeah.
And in this sort of last few minutes we have here, what kind of thoughts, what kind of dreams, hopes, ideas, possibilities do you want to share with us? This is your time.
My dream is to get extra 5 hours a day so that I can sleep more.
I think Trinity can fund that.
Trinity. I will talk to Phil about that. Yeah. I am hopeful for a church and where I come from, whose leadership reflects those in the pews. And in all kind of shapes, forms, and gender. It took 12 years for another woman bishop to be elected in Southern Africa. So the first 2 was the late Bishop Elena Wamukoya and Bishop Margaret Vechu. 12 years later, I was elected, and then Bishop of Swaziland was elected a few months later. So I don't want us to wait for another 12 years to do that. But is this church reflective of the young people that we have, the 60% that was talked about that is unemployed? What is the church doing? We cannot be bystanders and keep on telling government to create work when we have the resources to do that and opportunities to do that. I asked the people of Lesotho, where do you buy your vestments? Who makes them? If it's not in of us in the church, where do you get your candles? Who makes them? We can plant grapes and kind of have our own exciting wine that, truly when we have it, we feel the spirit in the real sense of spirit. And I'm just saying, we have all these resources and opportunities. Can we do that? So my dream is that this church has to create the wealth that it seeks. And we can do it because we have the abilities to do that. Lesotho has 216 schools. There are a lot of schools. So my measuring stick as I go on is, quantity versus quality. Do I need to have so many schools for the sake of telling people I have schools, and some of them I will not even send my children to go and study there because they're not in good condition? Yeah. We have a brilliant hospital. Are we just satisfied with one hospital and 4 clinics in a nation of 2 million people? Can't just the church really be proactive, be in partnership with the government? Because I believe it's a work of the church to care and to feed and things, but we have given that responsibility to government and we complain. So those are my dreams, that we are able and capable of really not just preaching the gospel, but living the gospel.
You said create the wealth that...
We can create the wealth that we seek.
Yeah. And so I hear opportunities for partnership.
Plenty in this room, I see them.
We're all inviting ourselves to Lesotho, I think, and I've been told we must bring a cow.
Yes.
Yes. All right, everybody.
I want to thank you for this. This has been a blessing to all of us. We love you. We want you to come back, but we also want to come to you, both in spirit and also in presence. Thank you so much, Bishop. You are a blessing.
Thank you. Thank you, sisters.
Thank you, my dear.